Hey TCSTV viewers, it's Evelyn here from the camera store, and thank you for tuning in tonight for our TCSTV Live Gearing Up for Landscape Photography. And joining me this evening we have Dunna Did It from his YouTube channel. And we also have Matt Scobel, who's a landscape photographer based in the Rocky Mountains. And we just did a live event with him recently, which we'll chat about a little bit. And we also have Anthony from Sony Canada. He's also joined by some of his compadres across Canada, Jadu and Stuart, also in the chat. So we have lots of support here to answer your Sony questions. And soon we'll get right into a conversation, and you guys can ask lots of questions. For those of you that registered for this event tonight, we are going to be sending a link to some curated Sony specials that are great for landscape photography since they're a sponsor. And we'll also send a survey for feedback about this event. We love hearing all kinds of feedback. If you didn't register and you want to get in on that, make sure you send an email to Riley, and her email address is just in the description below. And speaking of going live, we have our TCSTV Dream Team behind the scenes tonight, and that includes Drew, Gary, and Riley, and they're all working hard to make sure that everything goes smoothly. But of course, this is live, and so anything can happen. And if something weird goes on, then we'll make sure we update you in the comments as it progresses and, you know, we fix things or whatever. But definitely make sure that you put your questions in the chat. And if you're not logged into YouTube and you want to ask questions, you can also send them to my email address, which is evelyn@thecamerastore.com. And I'll be moderating both my email and the YouTube chat window. So why don't we just get into it and introduce these guys? They can tell us a little bit about themselves. Dunna, welcome to the show. This is your first time actually being on camera with us. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Well, my name isn't actually Dunna, but everybody calls me Dunna, and I have a YouTube channel called Dunna Did It that, I mean, encapsulates everything that I do, but mostly I talk about camera gear, I do reviews, I do tutorials, a little bit of vlogging here and there. I sneak it in because it's a lot of fun to do, but that's kind of my deal. And you know, I'm hanging out on YouTube and Instagram and those kinds of places where you can find me. And yeah, just nerding out about camera stuff as much as possible.
I love it. Yeah, join the club of all the camera nerds that are probably watching tonight. And I mean, we're at the camera store right now, so I am in just like a house of camera nerds. And well, as you know, I'm married to a camera nerd, so it just kind of comes with part of the pudding.
You surround yourself with good people.
Yeah. Exactly. We love it. And then next we have Matt Scobel. Hey, Matt. Thanks for joining us.
How are you? Yes, thanks for having me. This is fun. This is a much more relaxed environment here, going live from the comfort of my home than it was from going live at the top of Sulphur Mountain a few weeks ago. But my name is Matt Scobel. Like Dunna, I get involved in a lot of different things in the photography and videography space. I love photography. My true love, my first love was landscape photography. I started with a long trip across Canada and taking landscapes from coast to coast, and have just loved it ever since. It's still my number one hobby to get out there and take landscape photos. So try a lot of other different things, but I always come back to landscapes.
Yeah, well, and we've had some fun experiences with Matt. Of course, we're mentioning this live stream. We just gotta let the cat out of the bag on that one. So if you guys want to check it out, we did a live stream about a month ago where Matt had this crazy idea of doing basically a landscape photography workshop on the top of a mountain. So I said, okay, yeah, we could probably do that. Let's rope in the TCSTV Dream Team and they'll figure it out. And so we dragged all the gear up there, and Dunna came out with us too, and it was a lot of fun. Dave and I were here at the store. You guys were up on the mountain, and you basically showed people what you could see through your camera, gave some instruction, and it was our first time doing like an on-location live stream. So that was cool. We've also done some in the field workshops. We did a night photography one a couple of years ago, which was a lot of fun. And so hopefully we'll have more of that collaboration in the future. Yeah, so thanks, Matt. And last but not least, we have Anthony Jones from Sony Canada, who's become a good friend of the camera store over the years, based in Calgary, and is also an awesome landscape photographer himself and surrounds himself in lots of excellent gear and photography people. So welcome, Anthony.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's after talking camera business all day, it's going to be nice to join in on one of these workshops and actually talk cameras for a change. So looking forward to the discussion tonight.
Definitely. So to get things started, I want to talk a little bit about location. So we did a shoot recently on Sulphur Mountain, which is a very popular destination. You take a gondola up there or you can hike it. And there's some really cool vantage points, but obviously it is kind of a tourist destination. And so Matt, I want to start with you and talk about how you can sometimes find some special spots, even if you're going to more like touristy destinations. What are you looking for?
Rule of thumb, wherever the people aren't, that's where I usually try to go. So somewhere like Sulphur Mountain, where there's, it's a big tourist destination. It's the top of a mountain, but there's an amazing boardwalk there. It's very accessible for people that are not used to very aggressive hikes in the Rockies. I usually just look for different unique angles at different locations, try to get as far away from, the buildings as you can. The further you go, the less people there are. And it's usually able to find some really unique compositions. And then it's like experimentation for me. So, changing my angle, lower, higher, trying different things, just looking for a composition that kind of speaks to me and is something that maybe I've never seen before. When I'm normally traveling and I'm not somewhere like Sulphur Mountain, I just like to get out and hike, get off the road. And they say if you go 100 meters from the road, I mean, the amount of people it's gone, right? You can really find some unique places. And I scout, I have a lot of techniques to find cool spots. And then I go there and try to take something that I'm proud of. So, yeah.
Awesome. What about you, Dunna? You've been doing a lot of different stuff in the Rockies, and you did a video showing kind of behind the scenes of the live stream, but then you also showcased your own little adventure that you did recently in the Rockies. Can you tell us a bit about that and how you found some special spots?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm up in Edmonton, so I'm like 4.5-ish hours away from the mountain. So it's a bit of a trek to get out there. So when I do get out there, I do, just like Matt said, like I like to go on hikes and stuff like that if I can. And one of the things that I found is that wherever the spots are that are kind of the obvious viewpoints and that kind of stuff, if you go just a little bit further or a little bit back from that, or even like I'll do the whole hike and do most of my photography on the way back down, kind of scope out everything, get those view spots. And if there are a bunch of people there, or if that's just like kind of an overused spot, if you just kind of overshoot that a little bit, and then sometimes you got to get a little bit off the beaten path, but sometimes those are the coolest views, and sometimes you can get more unique views if you're not necessarily at the complete peak of whatever your hike is or whatever. I mean, obviously, like it's going to look incredible if you're at the top of Sulphur Mountain, but if you're on the hike on the way up, maybe you can get a vantage point kind of through the trees or something like that. Use a different frame. There are all these kind of little things that you can do to essentially look at the same things, but from a different vantage point, so that you're not necessarily taking the same photo that everybody is snapping on their phones or whatever they're using, kind of thing.
Have you guys ever put yourself in a precarious spot to get those like slightly different angles? Like, have you climbed any trees or done anything crazy?
I've stood in I've stood in a couple of places that I was really unsure of. I try and do a lot of my stuff with me running out into the frame as well, because that's just like it gives you kind of a subject in the frame, and it gives you scale and that kind of stuff. And so I've definitely like set up the tripod in a safe place and then run out into out on the very tip of a rock or something where I didn't want to get too far out. And yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What about you, Matt?
It's relative. I was just thinking of like the stories but yeah, for me, I do try to really be careful with risk, especially in the Rockies. So there's a lot of things I kind of do to protect that, having a GPS with me, telling people where I'm going, kind of scouting things out during the day if I'm shooting at night. But photography when you're in the kind of that pursuit of finding a unique composition, a unique place, like you do find yourself sometimes in places that may not be necessarily safe. So I won't get into any specific stories, but I definitely have I've put myself in some kind of cool spots to try to get some photos.
Sounds good. All right, well, let's get into a little bit of chit chat about what you guys are packing for your landscape photography and kind of what type of shots you're getting. And so, again, Matt, I'll start with you. And I just want to know a little bit about like what camera are you shooting with right now? Why did you choose that for landscape photography? And then what lenses do you like to use? Like what's your optimum focal length?
Yeah, of course. I'll tell a bit of a story here. I'll tie in the camera store and this was my very first experience with photography. Was shooting on a little, I think it was a Canon M1 at the time. I went across Canada, and I knew I wanted a full frame. Like I knew I wanted to shoot a full frame camera, and I was like just getting excited about it. And I was on a road trip, and I came through Calgary, and I didn't know anything about the camera store at the time. And I looked you guys up, and I went in there. And I remember I was negotiating with someone there about trading in all the Canon gear for a Sony R2 and or A7R2. I did the trade in, and I picked up a Sony A7R2 at the time and a Sony 16 to 35 2.8 G Master. I think I spent more on the lens than I did on the camera, or something very close. Mm-hmm. And that was like my first kit. That was just such an incredible. And I still to this day, that's my go-to lens. Like I've taken most of my favorite landscape photos have been taken with that lens. And it's just been awesome. I've since kind of upgraded. Well, I've kind of upgraded, but in a way kind of took it a step sideways. So I've moved to a Sony A7 III, which I use for kind of my primary photography camera. And then I'm not going to steal Dunna's thunder here, but also on the video side, the FX3 has been a camera that I just picked up about a month and a half ago, and I kind of keep those two in combination. Mm-hmm. Focal lengths, that 16-35 is still like go-to, but I've done all sorts of crazy stuff. I've shot with the Sony 135 1.8 portrait lens, which is a crazy lens to shoot landscape photography with, but it's super sharp. And it can create some kind of unique compositions that you don't see. And then my lens that I keep on my camera, like all the time, like pick it up, go, walk out the door, is the Sony 24 to 105 f4. That's like, can't miss. Like you just have that lens with you, and you've got the focal lengths covered. So that's my main go-to on camera gear.
Yeah, that's a nice kit. And I think you made a really good point that sometimes people getting into buying camera gear or landscape photography maybe in general is that the glass is so much more important in a lot of ways than the camera. And so if you have a certain budget in mind that you want to hit, you might want to look at maybe one of the more entry-level point cameras to get you the specs that you need, and then invest that additional budget that you have into your glass, because your image quality on how those landscape images are going to look really comes down to how good the glass is. And Anthony, I wanted to mention that, a couple of those lenses that Matt talked about, actually, we have on sale at the camera store right now because it's still the summer sale from Sony. So the link is in the description if you want to check those out. But Anthony, could you talk a little bit about the longer lens for landscape photography and like why someone would maybe want to get into more of like a telephoto or like a portrait length lens and what that would look like?
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing that a lot of people explore. I actually, before I got my 200 to 600, I was using another adapted 150 to 600, and I was actually playing around with shooting landscapes at 500 to 600 mil just to really isolate certain sections of the landscape. It also gives you a really nice compression effect. So it gives you a much more unique, everybody runs around, well, I shouldn't say that, saying that the wrong way, but I mean, the general go-to for landscape is usually wide angle. So if you're looking for something unique, you're usually, like I said earlier, falling in a stream or trying to find, a different viewpoint. Whereas you start migrating to something above 150, 200 millimeters, it just gives you a completely different look to the landscape with the compression and the subject isolation.
Kind of brings the mountain to you or whatever it is that you're shooting at. Makes it look bigger, more impressive sometimes.
You can get some interesting layering if you've got, some mist, some trees, the mountain itself. A lot of that you're not going to be able to necessarily bring to the forefront with wide angle lens, whereas if you zoom in, and like you said, really bring it to you, you can really force that layering in to get some fairly dramatic images.
Awesome. And then on the multimedia side, Dunna, what are you packing when you go on your Rocky Mountain adventures?
Oh man, it's always a bit of a tough thing. So I mean, like you said, like I'm out there shooting. It's probably like 60% video, 40% photo, you know, between whether I'm out there shooting a YouTube video or reviewing something, or whether I'm out there just to get photos kind of thing. It's this weird toss up. And so the kit lately has been primarily my FX3. Even for the photo side, as well as either I usually bring a second camera body for when I'm doing time lapses at whatever point in my adventure. So I'll throw up a camera doing a time lapse, and then I'll have either an A7 III or my A7S III as kind of my backup body. And it's been really interesting playing around with the 12 megapixel photos, even and especially for what I do, which is primarily just like online content. The 12 megapixels has been dandy for me, and is fantastic in a lot of those situations where you've got really high dynamic range. Like it captures everything so nicely. As far as lenses go, I shot the whole behind the scenes kind of doc that we did about the live stream there. I shot that all on the 16-35 G Master, and that has been, since I bought that lens, which is probably 6 months or so ago now, that lens has really lived on my camera as my kind of go-to for any kind of documenting of whatever I'm doing, even more so than I used to always kind of run around with a 24-70 on there, but lately it's been that wider angle. And since I've been doing more hiking lately, I recently picked up the 20mm f1.8 to see if I could make my kit a little bit lighter. And I shot a vlog kind of thing up up Little Lougheed, which is a hike near Canmore there, and that lens is absolutely beautiful and significantly lighter than the 16-35. Obviously, you lose a little bit of that versatility that you might get from a zoom lens, but I kind of still had my my ultra wide kind of angle covered for most of the like more typical landscape photography that I might do, and then and as well for the vlogging and that kind of stuff. And then I usually pack a 70-200. I actually have the f4 mostly because I like to try and keep my pack as light as I possibly can. It's when you're on your way up a mountain or something like that, you don't want to be hauling too much of that. I'm listening to Anthony talking about the 200 to 600 there, and I'm thinking I'm not going up a mountain with a 200 to 600 anytime soon. But it does depend a little bit on the situation. But that'll be kind of my typical kit. Will be two bodies, some kind of ultra wide, whether it be the 16-35 or the 20 now, and then some kind of a more telephoto-ish lens. And every once in a while I throw in my like 55-1.8 or something like that, just to see if anything fun can come from it. But that's kind of the main kit.
The meat and potatoes. Could you show us that photo beforehand? You talked about the Little Lougheed shot, and that's with the 20mm lens. I'd love to see that.
Let me figure out how to share my screen here, and I'll do that.
Let's do that.
There we go.
Perfect.
So everyone's seeing that now. So this was Little Lougheed, the hike that I just did there, and this was actually one of those examples where this wasn't at the peak. This was kind of probably about 2/3 of the way up, and I just kind of saw a little off the beaten path kind of spot where there was a rock that looked like it was sturdy enough to stand on, and so I set up the tripod. I set it into time lapse or into what's it called, intervalometer mode. So it was taking a photo every couple of seconds, and then set my focus and all that kind of stuff, and ran out there. It probably took me a full minute hike away from my camera to go and find that spot. And then, so I could make a ridiculous time lapse of me going over the rocks to get there, but this was kind of the finish of that. And yeah, this is that 20mm, and just absolutely love how sharp it is, and how wonderful it is. I shot this at f11.
Nice. And then did you use any kind of filters on this one, Dunna?
I was for this one because I was shooting a video at the same time. I shot this with my Freewell, their new variable ND, magnetic variable ND system. I just kind of left it on for the whole time. So nothing that was specific to this shot. And if you do look closely, because I'm using a VND, there is a little bit of cross polarization up in the sky that I've tried to help a little bit with the edit and stuff. But anytime you're using a variable ND, that's a possibility. And unfortunately, I didn't catch it at the time. But otherwise, I would have maybe adjusted a little bit. But yeah, that's kind of my go-to for just run and gun shooting.
Okay, we have a couple questions that have popped up here. This one's for you, Dunna. Why do you choose to use time-lapse and not use the live view in your smartphone with the app?
There's a couple of reasons. Maybe I'll stop sharing here. Yeah, so a lot of the time I do actually use the app, but it depends on how far I have to go away from the camera. Because the Wi-Fi connection is limited, especially when you're outside. I find it's a little bit limited as to how far you can get away from your camera. The FX3 I noticed actually has a really great connection comparatively to even my A7 III. They've done some magic inside there where it definitely has a better connection. But even so, if I'm running as far away as I was in that last shot there, I'm definitely going to lose my live view. Whereas if I'm doing like a closer up kind of portrait or something like that, I'll use the app for that. It's got its own set of difficulties when you do the intervalometer. Like you want to set your focus ahead of time because you don't know what it's doing while you're running out there. You're just like hoping that it's focusing on you and that kind of stuff. And it seems like the app is getting better. I've noticed that on the A1 when I had it for a review there, they've given us the tap to focus and stuff, which we used to have way back in the day and then got lost when they went to the new processors. And so now we're starting to get that back, and the app is getting a little bit better. So hopefully when we see even more new cameras coming from Sony, that'll keep getting better. And if we keep getting better connection too, maybe I'll stop using the intervalometer.
We have a question from Nahir, and this is anybody can chime in. Is it a good idea to get the A7R4 rather than have two bodies? So would you say if budget is a concern, you want to decide like should you have two bodies, you have a backup, or is it better to invest in like a higher end, high resolution camera? What do you guys think, Matt?
Yeah, I'm always on the side of having two cameras. I mean, if you're shooting landscape, there's so much advantage. You can do the time lapse on one side with one camera, and you can shoot your nice landscape photo with the other. If you want to get some behind the scenes footage or maybe capture your experience like a vlog like Dunna does, you have that option. And if something goes wrong, like there's nothing worse than going on, an awesome epic adventure, and you find this like beautiful location and it's golden hour and you're so excited. And then like what happens if, there is something wrong with the camera, you have that backup. So every situation's different, and I'm sure it's a budget consideration, what you're using it for. There's a lot of factors, but if as a rule of thumb, I prefer two cameras over just having like one that does everything for me.
Are you kind of in the same vein there, Dunna?
Yeah, I agree across the board there. If you can have two, even like sometimes I'm trying to decide whether the extra weight in the bag is worth it to bring the second body, because a lot of the time I won't necessarily actually need a second body, but I always end up taking it because I know that, like Matt said, you get to that viewpoint and then something happens where you're not sure, some kind of a glitch, and you can't call Sony support from halfway up a mountain or whatever. So having that second body is huge. And again, like that, like Matt said, I'm almost always get to wherever I'm going, shoot a time lapse with one camera and take some photos with another, or vlog with the other one, or whatever. So you can kind of double up on those sweet spots of time, because that's really a huge factor with landscape photography. Is you get those golden moments, whether it's at golden hour or not. There are those like golden moments of light where the light's just coming just through the clouds just perfectly. And so having two cameras can be really helpful there because you can get them both working.
Totally. Now, all of the cameras that you guys have talked about have been full frame Sony cameras. And so what I'm curious about is on the more entry level to full frame, what are your thoughts on having maybe like a Sony A7C as your secondary body? Is that something that you would consider or recommend for someone that's kind of getting started out and they want to get those two bodies, but maybe, they don't want to invest as much?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love I love the A6000 series. I had an A6500. That was my secondary camera forever. I recently sold it, and I have I have a little bit of regret because it's just it was just it's just a small little compact camera. I loved it. I had a little 50mm lens on it. It's just easy to grab. And again, as a secondary camera, that's a really great option because you have your primary, you're going to use that 99% of the time, but if something goes wrong, you've got that small little compact crop sensor that you can use. So
yeah. Well, the A7C has the full frame, but it's sort of that same idea as like the A6000 series, similar form factor, a lot lighter. So yeah, no, I think that's great advice.
Yeah, totally. I think that the A7C has made it really difficult for me to still recommend, the Sony APS-C stuff to a lot of people that are in that kind of mid-level where they're looking to kind of really up their game. I think for beginners, the crop stuff from Sony is still a great option. Especially they just came out with the ZV-E10, which is absolutely geared towards those kind of people who are like, what do I get for my first camera? Especially for people who want to shoot video stuff for YouTube and that kind of thing. But that A7C is a really, really great option, especially like you said, as a backup camera. It barely takes up any space. It's essentially the same size as the A6600. I know when I had them both side by side, it's negligible, basically, the difference.
Totally. And we have a question about getting good background blur in landscapes in Photoshop, but I'm going to spin this question a little bit to talk again about full frame sensors and just some of the advantages that you have, being able to use brighter lenses. And so I guess, what is the best way to get that attractive background blur just right out of camera? Maybe Anthony, could you start just in talking about some of the advantages of full frame and some of the brighter lenses?
Yeah, actually, I'll share my screen. I've actually got an image that might speak to this. Okay. And I'll talk over it. So if you can see my screen here.
Yeah.
So this isn't so much background defocus as it is foreground defocus. So the nice thing with a lot of the, especially full frame with the much larger sensor than crop, and once you get into the smaller sensors of point and shoots, you can isolate depth of field much more easily. So this one was actually shot out of necessity because when you're in front of Big Ben and you realize you've left the tripod in the hotel room,
oh no,
you kind of have to make do. So this was shot, it's the 55-1/8 Zeiss. It's, I believe I shot this wide open at 1/8, handheld at 1/160th, so that's fine. But yeah, I mean, when you start playing with depth of field and landscape, everybody usually stops down. So you can get all that detail in the foreground, midground, and background. Whereas if you do something where this almost speaks to the using the longer lenses earlier, where you can really isolate a subject, stop down a little bit, and really push the eye into a certain section of the image to really call something out, rather than just having everything dead in focus when you're up at f13, f16.
Nice. Yeah, that's a perfect example of that. What are your guys' thoughts? Like, what are some tips that you have in order to achieve that nice shallow depth of field when you're out shooting nature, landscapes, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's unfortunately like this compromise, right? As you look at those lenses on the shelf and you're trying to decide what to pick, and as you see that little F number go lower and lower and lower, and you see the price go higher and higher. But there is such a huge advantage because especially when you're shooting landscapes, you get like the dual benefit of having the ability to add a bit of bokeh, add a bit of background blur, like in Anthony's example, if you want to, but also for low light. So when you're shooting, if you're shooting at blue hour, you're even shooting, astrophotography, the more light you can let into the lens, the better you're going to be able to produce an image. So when you're looking at, landscape lenses and you're saying, oh, this is, 1.4 or 1.8 or 2.8, you're going to get huge advantages over that. Unfortunately, it's more expensive to make, so it's going to be a more expensive lens, but there hasn't been any you can always stop down. There hasn't been a situation where I've regretted having a nice lens with a nice wide aperture. So.
Oh, yeah. And then for you, Dunna, do you prefer a zoom or a prime lens? Nahir says, I've noticed that when I take a picture with my prime lens, the picture is always way sharper, but again, limited with the reach. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, your versatility is going to be way more with a zoom lens. Like just being able to go from 16 to 35 does definitely make a difference when you're out there and you want to get that perfect composition. Especially, I've noticed, when I'm shooting on the FX3 or the A7S III and I only have 12 megapixels to work with, I have to assume that I'm not going to be able to crop in as much as if I had something like the R4 or whatever, where you've got 60 megapixels to work with. So having a zoom lens definitely makes a big difference, but there is the trade-off with zoom lenses where it's harder for them to make them as sharp. Now, something like the 16 to 35 G Master is an incredibly sharp lens, but if you compare that with the G Master primes, they're still going to blow it out of the water because they're doing so much more with that single focal length. I think it's just a lot easier on a manufacturing level to make primes so much sharper. And that's actually one of the reasons why lately I have been kind of trading out the 16 to 35 for the 20 millimeter f1.8, because it is incredibly sharp and incredibly beautiful picture quality as well. And that's kind of a bit of a trade-off that you make with zooms. And so if you are going to get into zooms because you want them for the versatility, again, like Matt said, it's like I've never regretted getting that 16 to 35 G Master, even though it was a little bit more expensive. Whereas I do have the 16 to 35 f4 as well. And it just, even when it was the only 16 to 35 I had available, it just didn't get used as much because it doesn't quite stand up to anything else. So if you're going to go zooms, I do suggest really lay into it and just go for the higher quality ones, because it does make a big difference, and you will notice the difference in the sharpness and the picture quality and the chromatic aberration and all those kinds of things as well.
Cool. Well, I want to steer things a little bit back into some techniques that we touched on a little bit earlier. So, Dunna, you had mentioned that you like to sometimes put yourself into the frame to kind of give a little bit of context and that kind of thing. And before we hopped on the live, Matt kind of teased a photo that had a very interesting character in it. So, Matt, would you mind sharing that with us?
I absolutely will.
Yeah.
Let me see.
I need
I'm just
to know
trying
the
to
story
predict
behind
whether
this photo.
trying to predict whether the one you're thinking is the one that I'm thinking. Are you thinking this one?
No.
Did I get it? No, a different one.
This one. Yes.
This one here?
Yeah.
Okay, we got delay. Yeah, so I mean, all these photos have such an interesting story for me, but this one was, again, on a road trip across Canada. I was actually at Whistler Campground in Jasper National Park in the Canadian Rockies, and I was sleeping in an old Volkswagen camper van that I took across Canada, and I kind of got a knock on the window, and some other campers were kind of calling to say hey, there's this huge bull elk inside the campsite. And I kind of got up out of a slumber, and I kind of got right on the edge of the, you open up the door of your vehicle and I could kind of shoot through the window while still being safe. And unfortunately, there's kind of a bad story to this and a good story. The good story is the shot. The bad story is there were some kind of tourists that were on the opposite side, where this elk is looking, and they were kind of trying to get photos, and they were in a position that I wouldn't put myself in. We have a lot of elk in this area, and they can be very, very dangerous. And you can tell by this shot, you wouldn't want to be in the way of this thing when it charged you. But luckily for me, it wasn't paying attention to me; it was paying attention to them. And this was actually shot with an adapted lens. So this was shot with the Canon 70-300. When I bought that A7R II, I bought the 16-35, but I didn't have any real zoom lenses. So I still had that 70-300. I bought a MC11, which is an adapter that you can use to adapt your Canon lenses to your Sony camera. And I zoomed it in and got this shot, and I have everyone tells me like, were you riding this elk when you took this photo? But no, it was just a good zoom lens with some cool compression and some background blur.
Yeah, and
you
I
just
think
had the GoPro strapped to your chest while you were riding it, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that should have been. I should have made the whole story up and just lied to the entire internet. That would have been a good idea.
That would have been good. But yeah, I mean, I think that photo in particular is such a good example of utilizing that shallow depth of field and the compression to bring your subject close to you, have that beautiful background separation. And I mean, I could see, a photograph like that is something that becomes kind of a work of art that you could put on the wall and has an interesting subject, an interesting story behind it. And I think that's fantastic.
If I wanted to break the third wall, I could turn the camera and show you the print of this in my place, but I'm not going to do that.
No, and I always love to talk about that is no matter what you're photographing, I think landscapes are one of the big ones where you should not keep them stored on your hard drive. Print your landscape photos, because I think it helps people grow so much as landscape photographers to really see their work in the printed form. And so I don't know, is that something that you often do, Matt, is print your work?
Yeah, I do. I try to, combination. So I sell prints online, and if people purchase them, I drop ship them. So I have a supplier, and I can send those prints out. But my favorite photos I try to print and keep in the house. It's a really, you're 100% right. I mean, you can open up Lightroom or Capture One and look at your photos and kind of be proud of something you did and remember it. But it's a whole different thing to kind of like look at it in the house and see it. So I have quite a few of my images printed, and it's definitely, I recommend it to anyone. Just print your stuff, put it up, show it off. I think it's definitely a cool thing to do.
Awesome. We had a question earlier that I kind of skipped over, but I want to get back to it. And that's on what's the other stuff that you guys bring when you're preparing for a landscape shoot? In particular, maybe we'll start with Dunna, because someone was asking about what kind of go-to video lights do you bring with you? And then what are some of the other essentials that have to go in your pack? It could be, from little accessories, tripods, filters, snacks. What do you bring?
Yeah, as far as lights go, I don't generally bring any. I guess it depends on the adventure that I'm going on, but if I'm doing any of these kind of hiking things that we've been talking about, I'm generally not bringing any lights. If I do feel like I might need it, I'll throw in the Aperture MC, or if I'm doing anything at dawn or dusk kind of thing, I'll bring a little light like the Aperture MC. As far as other stuff goes, I've been using the three-legged thing, Punk's Brian tripod. That's one of my favorites because it's a carbon fiber tripod. It's super light. It packs down pretty small, but it still goes to 7 feet tall or something ridiculous like that. So it's kind of got the best of both worlds. It's a nice compact travel tripod, but at the same time, a lot of the time, because I'm shooting myself and I'm shooting video of myself and I'm 6'1", I need a tripod that can go high enough to frame me properly. And then, my thing lately, for whatever reason, has been Oreos and coffee. So if I'm going on a hike, and I posted a video this week, there was a review of the 20mm f1.8, and the whole thing was a vlog. Basically, I started it off and then I shot a vlog, and then at the end I talk about the lens a little bit, but it was the hike up Little Lougheed there. And at the start I was showing that my ritual lately has been I pack a tumbler with some coffee in it and a little baggie of Oreos, and that's my prize for getting to the top of the hike there. So and actually I've been trying to, if I can share my screen again here, I've been trying to get some kind of shot of me with the coffee cup or with the Oreos lately.
You need to get a sponsor. Oreo sponsor you.
There you go. Yeah, I got to get Oreos yeah. Yeah, so I've been trying to do that and kind of make it a bit of a theme or a character throughout my photography and videography on these kinds of adventures. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else, but I guess for me, there's also audio gear. I usually rock with either the Rode Video NTG as kind of my main audio, or I'll bring the Rode Wireless Go 2 as kind of a backup, or if I need to get away from the camera for a specific shot and still have audio, I'll use that wireless system. And yeah, I think that pretty much covers what's in my bag.
Awesome. And then Matt, what about you?
You covered the most important.
Yeah.
I was gonna say he covered the most important stuff: snacks, coffee, that type of
Snacks
thing.
and
Hot
coffee,
chocolate,
yeah.
But Matt, what tripod and ball head do you use, or are you shooting handheld?
Yeah, I have a VO2 Go is my tripod. I won't say anything negative. Yeah, I've gone through a couple different tripods. I'm probably something that's on my list to upgrade. Just something like a little bit more compact. I have a personal, like, we probably shouldn't get too crazy into tripods, but just the actual way that the tripod opens is something that's just drove me nuts lately. So I'm looking for an upgrade there.
I know
in
a
terms
place.
of gear,
I know a place, Matt. You
yeah,
could,
I was thinking where
pop
I could
over
go to check
and
that
show some
out
tripods.
right after this. But I'll give a couple ones. I think just in terms of gear on the more like photography gear side, there's one light that I really love. It's a Lytra LP 1200, and I read that because I can't remember the actual model number, but it's a little Lytra waterproof light. And I've used it so many times, like putting it in the water. It has little gels. You can go blue or green or red. And just when you're doing landscapes, like sometimes you want to get creative and you want to add some light to the scene. So that one light has been something that I take with me pretty much all the time. So that's a really good one. The other thing is, again, depending on where you are, because I'm in the Rockies and it can be quite dangerous sometimes, I have a little Garmin InReach. And for people that don't know these devices, they're GPS devices, but the critical thing is that even when you don't have cell phone signal, they can send and receive text messages, and there's a little SOS button if you get into trouble. And they're expensive. It can cost anywhere like $15 to $30 a month for the service, but for peace of mind, for two reasons. One, if you are in like a tough situation, you get hurt, it is a lifesaver, literally a lifesaver to have that. A reason a lot of people don't think about is, and Dunna, you can tell me if you've ever been in this situation. You're heading out. Maybe you're gonna go take some photos at golden hour. Maybe you tell your significant other, "Hey, I'm gonna be back, by sunset," and then all of a sudden something happens. It's the perfect sunset. Oh, wait a second, it gets a little dark. Oh, look, the Milky Way oh, look, there's Northern Light, and the next thing you know, it's like 4 hours later, and you don't have a cell phone signal. So if you want to save your marriage or your relationship and you want to make sure people know where you are, this Garmin InReach can send a text message and just say, "Hey, like I'm going to be a few minutes late, don't get upset." So that's like one big one. And then the last one is hand warmers. And I know this seems like kind of a winter thing, but I put on my, Canadian Rockies hat. Even in fringe season, even in the summer, sometimes the temperature can change quick. And like Dunna, if you've done some hikes, you could be thinking, "Oh, it's beautiful." Well, I don't want to tell the story when we went on top of Sulphur Mountain.
Go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
You tell it.
When it was 30 degrees in the city and 9 degrees Celsius on the top of the mountain, I was a little chilly in my shorts.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we're scouting, right? And this is a common thing. You come from Calgary or from, area where it's 25 degrees, you get to the Rockies, you think, "Hey, it's going to be beautiful." And it is, until you get into elevation and you get a little bit of wind or a little bit of cloud and it gets cold quick. So Evelyn, we learned the hard way how cold it can get at the top of Sulphur Mountain.
We did.
Yeah.
But hand warmers for two reasons: to keep warm, but batteries. So if you're shooting in cold conditions, take some hand warmers with you. Take your spare batteries, put them in your pocket with the hand warmers. Keep the batteries warm. More life on the batteries, which means you won't miss a shot. So there's my gear tips.
Yeah. And then what about you, Anthony? When you're traveling, what are some of your go-to accessories that you have to bring? And is there any tips you have for like protecting your Sony gear?
He hooked me up with this little guy when I did my last trip. So it's a little Leo Photo tripod with a ball head. And this thing is nice and small, folds up, tucks into the side pocket of my think tank bag. So when we're out and about, I try to just have the one backpack. And I've got a couple Frotto carbon fibers, but they suit in certain conditions. But when you're in the city running around trying to shoot, it's a little obtrusive. So this thing I can't recommend too much at all. It saved my bacon a number of times, and it looks small, but this is. I'm just going to share a screen quickly here if I can find the right button.
Who did you say made it?
It's Leofoto, Leofoto.
Yes, and that one is available at the camera store.
Yes,
nice.
Gary's the one that hooked me up. So it's great. I mean, it looks like a tiny little tripod, but where we're standing in front of Tower Bridge, and it's Blue Hour in this instance, I just set I believe this is the 7R3 with the 16 to 35 f4. It's set up on this on a ledge and just let her rip. So normally you'd think you have to truck in a much larger tripod than this, but it did the trick. It's something like this at Hampton Court, where basically I got this nice low angle shot. This is 16 to 35 f4 again, and just small and unobtrusive, and especially when you're shooting mirrorless with some of the more compact lenses, it just helps you to not stick out in a crowd, which is great.
That's a 25-second exposure too, that f/18.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So it's a solid little unit. It's I can't recommend this thing too much. And to be honest, I actually swapped out my Manfrotto head for the Leofoto ball head. That's the big brother of this guy, because I was just so happy with how well it worked. So that's it. Like I said, I've got the bigger Manfrotto for some of the stuff where I'm, up to my knees in the stream and trying to get those shots there. But when you're kicking around the city, this thing's fantastic.
Yes, and we will put a link in the comments here, Riley, if you could to grab the link. What was the model again there, Anthony?
It's the Leofoto MT-03.
Okay, yeah, we'll try to post a link there in the chat.
Don't sell them all. I want one, so put one aside. Don't sell
we'll save one for you, Matt, and whoever else wants one. But yeah, so one of the other things that we didn't talk about in terms of packing in your kit is like intervalometers and things like that for doing stuff like time-lapse photography and that kind of thing. And Dunna, I know you have a stunning time-lapse that I'm hoping we can show from the TCSTV Dream team. But this is a cool thing that is built into a lot of the current Sony full-frame cameras, is that it has these features. So if you're out shooting awesome landscapes, nature, whatever, you can take advantage of some of these features and come home with a really cool piece of content to show people. So do we have it on there, guys?
Yes, we do.
Okay, they're going to pull it up and we can take a look. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about how you got this.
Yeah, so I mean, there's things have changed a little bit in terms of shooting time lapses on Sony cameras. They have introduced. It used to be an app that you would download on it, but now there's just a built-in intervalometer, so you can use that. They've also got S&Q mode on some of the cameras as well, where you can essentially shoot a pre-made time lapse, so it'll shoot at 1 frame per second, and then it'll compile that into a time lapse for you. This specific one was actually shot on the time lapse mode on the Atomos Ninja 5, which is a new thing that they just introduced into a firmware update. But yeah, I absolutely love shooting time lapses. I don't generally bring anything else to shoot them with me because now it's all built in, and it really just depends on kind of what you want out of your time lapse and that kind of stuff. Like if you need the absolute highest quality raw capabilities, then probably shooting it with an intervalometer or the built-in intervalometer, so you have all those photos, is going to be the way to go. But if you just want something that's quick and done, and especially now with the A7S III and the FX3, S&Q mode is full 4K quality at the same quality that you shoot your videos with, the same kind of compression and everything. So it's really, really high quality, and you don't really need much more than that to get these absolutely stunning time lapses.
Yeah, I just love how it brings a landscape to life. And again, like if you're someone that's looking to share your landscape work on Instagram or Facebook, whatever your platform you're using, I think a time lapse is always such a fun way to showcase, kind of what you were experiencing when you were in that location. So.
Yeah, I shared this one on an Instagram reel, and I got more comments than I think any Instagram reel of just people being like, "Wow, this is nuts." Because I think it's something that not everybody gets to experience necessarily, and then you get to throw that extra dimension of that whooshing clouds over and the sunlight trickling on the valley there, and yeah, just something kind of larger than life. It's very cool.
Very cool. Now, Matt, before we got started on the chat today, there was a few other landscape photos that you had pulled up, and I was wondering if you could show a few more and tell us just a couple stories behind some of your images.
Yeah, I'm gonna tie both of these together right here, both the time lapse and just the general stories about an image. So let's share this. Okay, so one man's time lapse is another man's long exposure, and this is
Love
something
it.
that Sony used to have this, and Anthony, close your ears. But people didn't love this app, but I used to love it. And they had a built-in kind of app store within the cameras. I think it ended around the A7R2 and maybe the A7 II. And this photo is actually taken with an application called Smooth Reflections. So like the old school Sony people will know this. And all this app was doing was basically shooting a time lapse. It was shooting hundreds of photos. In this case, I think it was 120 total photos. And then what it was doing is it was just blending them together inside the camera, which was really awesome. It would produce a raw photo that was actually a merger of all of those 120 photos. And you can do this same effect now by taking a time lapse, take your 100 and 200, 300 photos, and you can actually put these into Photoshop, and you can actually blend them together into one image. And what you're seeing here is kind of interesting. It's not obvious on first. You can see because the clouds are obviously very wispy that the clouds were sort of moving across the scene. But if you look, and I don't know if you'll be able to see my mouse, but if you kind of look at the water, you'll see these kind of dark spots that are kind of following the flow of the river. They're kind of doing like an S, and those are actually little tiny icebergs that were getting broken off the ice upstream, and were floating down the Bow River. And when I did this application, it just sort of merged them all together and created this image. So this was one of the first, actually one of the first landscape images that I took with that A7R2, and I used this application. And this today, has been like easily my most popular image. It was like, there's a crazy story how someone stole this and posted it on Reddit, and it made to the front page. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. But no one knew it was mine. And then I got to repost it again, and that photo made it to the front page. And then I recently actually sold this photo as an NFT, which is like a crazy other topic that I'm sure we can't cover now. But there you go. All done with a Sony, I think it was called Sony Play Mobile. I could be wrong, Anthony, you can correct me, but
Play Memories.
Play Memories. Yes, there you go.
Yeah.
Points to Dunna for that. So there's an example. It's not a time lapse, but it's the same idea, just capturing one image after another from the same location, and you can do some really, really clever stuff with it.
Same concept, yeah. Can you also show us the peak photo that you have there? The mountain
This
peak?
right here?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I'll bring up the information on this one. So this is Mount Rundle in Banff National Park, and you can get to this viewpoint if you're ever visiting Banff National Park. As you drive up to Mount Norquay, which is a very popular ski hill just across from the town of Banff, there's the lookout, and they call it I think they call it the Banff Town Site Lookout, something like that. And there's this incredible view up there of the valley, of the town of Banff, and of this view of Mount Rundle. But on this particular location or particular situation, there was inversion, right? And that's kind of like photographer's dream. You climb a mountain, and all of a sudden there's this incredible cloud layer that's sort of just going through the valley, and all you see on top is the peak. So it's very deceiving, but I'm kind of eye level with the mountain from another mountain. And I just got incredibly lucky that day the clouds were completely covering the valley. And you can see from the metadata up there, this was shot at 83 millimeters, which is just fantastically random focal length to shoot at. You can tell I had a lot of thought put into that one, but with the Sony 70-200 f4 Dunna. So that lens is useful. And this is another one of my absolute favorite photos of my portfolio.
Beautiful. Thanks, Matt.
No problem.
Cool.
We're back.
Well, I think we are getting close to wrapping this thing up tonight. And so I just want to get a little tidbit from each of you on what you would recommend as kind of your go-to tip if someone is getting into landscape photography, they want to get out there. Dunna, what would you say would be the number one thing that you would tell yourself starting out with landscape photography that you know now?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is to look around first. So before you put the camera up to your eye or whatever it happens to be, is really stop and look around and try and kind of make almost like a game plan kind of thing. I think this is something that can be taken at many different points along the process as well. But trying to come up with some kind of an idea for what you want the photo to look like before you just pull the camera up and start snapping, I think is probably what I would tell myself if I could go back and bug younger Dunna about how trigger happy I was, just you're looking around and you're just snapping and hope the what do they call it, spray and pray. They're just hoping that they catch something, so the idea get up where you think there might be something and then just stop and look around and try and come up with a game plan in your mind. Maybe you need to switch lenses, maybe you need some kind of a filter or something like that, but take your time with it.
Yeah, and on the note of spraying and praying, especially for newer photographers, one of the issues that comes up is memory and hard drive space. And we just had a question. This always happens whenever I threaten to wrap something up. What hard drives are reliable to back up your data, or are you using cloud storage? Who wants to go
I'll
with that?
give my perspective. I feel like Dunna, no hard drive is reliable. None. Zero. SSDs
Gary is giving the thumbs up. Yes, Matt, that's true.
Yes, I made Gary happy. Yeah, no hard drives are reliable. Dunna, I want to hear your opinion. You can go on YouTube and see hundreds of videos from different people with this is the strategy I used. It changed. I think at the core of it is just keep your photos in as many different locations as you can. Get a perfect strategy is use cloud, use hard drives, have a hard drive offsite, as much as you can. I know it's hard as photographers. You take a lot of images, and hard drives are, they can get expensive when you start getting into huge storage, but try to keep your photos in as many places as possible. And that's the only way to minimize the risk of, it's not when a hard drive, it's not if a hard drive will fail, it's when a hard drive will fail. So
yes,
100% agreed.
And Anthony, I'm going to direct this question to you because I think in the images that we were looking at before we got started, you had at least one or two in your collection of some black and white landscape photos. And we have a question for any tips on landscape photography and sort of seeing in black and white when you're looking for light for landscapes. Can you speak to that?
Oof, that's a toughie. Seeing in black and white, I think I've got a little bit of an advantage there. Just my background, I did a lot of lab and darkroom work back in the film day, and now it's been a lot of Photoshop and Lightroom after that. I've got about 18 years of photo lab before Sony. So there are a lot of areas I'll actually look at and I'll envision it in black and white before I even shoot it. So I'm going to share this one quickly. If I can hit the red buttons here. So this is an interesting one. This will speak a little bit to what Dunna was talking about earlier, is slowing down in researching. So I knew this is Beaufiddle Rock on the northeast coast of Scotland. And I'd seen pictures of it, didn't really know where it was. We were going to be in the area. So scouted this out with Google Maps and Google Earth beforehand, figured out the best time of day to be there for the light, how it was oriented, et cetera, et cetera. And then also just looking at this before I was even there, because I mean, Google Maps is basically cheating now for scouting locations. But and I sort of was able to envision the shot I wanted before I even got there. And then we lucked out when we got there. You see that cloud bank that blew in as we were shooting. This is actually midday. It looks a little bit later and a lot more dramatic than that. But yeah, this was just one of those shots that I'd looked at the location online. I knew how I wanted to shoot it. Took a few different versions of it to get that really misty ethereal or, get a little bit more movement to it. But a lot of it is also a lot of these subjects, when you're chasing castles and such, a lot of these just simply lend themselves to being shot in black and white. It just takes me back to those days in the darkroom with souping film and, Alfred paper and the trays and, my God, developer stop and fix and the whole 9 yards. So, yeah, it's just I've got a little bit of black and white in my DNA. I'm sure quite a bit of silver halide in the bloodstream, but yeah, it's I've always loved black and white, and I've actually cobbled together a fairly nice preset in Lightroom there for them. So yeah.
Awesome. And I mean, that is one way to get started with black and white photography is experiment with presets, see what you like, really play around with contrast. And but yeah, those are some beautiful examples, and hopefully that answers your question there. But yeah, so back to the top tip of what you would tell yourself back then when you were just getting started with landscape photography. What tip would you give yourself, Matt?
I'm going to say something controversial, and I disagree a little bit. Well, not disagree, but when I look back at my portfolio of images, and I was kind of picking, something I could share for this, I realized that most of the images that I'm most proud of were when I was just wandering aimlessly. Like when I was traveling and I didn't have an agenda, I was just, living the life of leisure. And I know it's not easy, but for everyone, but when I didn't have that, plan in the back of my head and I just wandered, I found myself in crazy random places that I was like, this is beautiful. And I think as a photographer, we can 100% get caught up on technique and gear, and we can get obsessed with do I need this lens and this camera? I still look back at some of the images that I took with, the entry level cameras, and they're still my favorite. I think I just encourage people to just shoot as much as you can. You're not going to, people say all the time, how do you get better? It's you just keep doing it, and you keep doing it. And then you look back at your old photos and you go, wow, what was I thinking? You just get better over time. And so I'd say those two things: wander as much as you can, and just keep shooting. So that's my advice.
I always called that getting lost. Just, rather than trying to over plan where you're going to go and stuff, just get lost.
Get lost. Yeah, you don't always mean that as a negative thing. When you tell your friends, your photography friends, hey, go get lost for a while. I love it. I think that's really solid advice. Well, thank you so much to all of you guys. Thank you to Sony Canada for sponsoring this. I know a lot of our chat tonight was sort of focused around Sony gear, but these guys, that's what they shoot, that's what they love. So we thought it was just perfect to bring Sony on board. And of course, as part of that, again, if you want to get in on the email link where we can give you some deals on some curated Sony products with some of the items that we talked about tonight, just shoot me an email. It's in the comments below. And as well as the description. And so we hope that you guys all will get lost again soon. Enjoy shooting some landscape photography, and we'll catch you all again soon.